welcome. Sorry I missed you at the start there. Yeah, so standards. Standards, just like how, every browser agrees that they're going to use H1, H2, H3, and HTML and everything. No one's like holding a gun to your head saying you have to use OAuth. But people have just sort of mutually agreed that, yeah, maybe we'll just all use the same way of doing this authentication stuff. So I would like you guys to turn and talk for 3 minutes just about what would some advantages be and disadvantages of someone else doing your authorization for you. So what are the pros and cons of you doing your own authorization and someone else doing authorization for you? So if you're not sitting next to anyone, please do sit next to someone. So you guys are pretty close over there. And Chauncey, you can be with the other two guys in the back. And yeah, 3 minutes, poof.
There's a big data breach or something, it's be on the line
All right, I hear the conversation dying down, so we're just going to stop right there. What'd you guys come up with? Pros, cons. Ah, crap. What? What?
Convenience.
Convenience. Sorry. I was looking around for who was saying that and didn't get it. Convenience. How so?
Not having to fill out a form to access the website.
Yeah. Cool. So that's a user experience thing. Is there also a con user experience with this? Crystal? Yeah, that's true. That's definitely true. So you're basically giving someone else access to your data. But John, just since you mentioned the UX thing, I'm thinking of one more UX thing. That's like a pro of doing OAuth, but there's also a con of OAuth from a UX standpoint. Anyone know what that is? Yeah, you're redirecting someone to a completely different site. Yeah, so there's that. What else? Yeah, exactly. So if I'm using like Twitter or Facebook or someone, if I'm using them for my authentication, then I mean I am pretty comfortable with that because they have however many engineers who are way more talented than I am, whose entire job is just making sure their butts are covered with authentication stuff. So I'm okay with relying on that. But if I was using Ashley Madison for my authentication or something, I might not be too happy about that. And I mean, even Target, like they had security breaches and everything. So you're still like giving up some security by letting someone else take care of your authentication for you. And you can never be entirely sure. I mean, it just takes one bonehead at some other company to make all of this data accessible. But at the same time, if you're doing it yourself, it just takes you being a bonehead to make all of your data accessible to other people. So, whose boneheadedness are you more comfortable in? Anyway, yeah, so there are trade-offs either way. But I don't know. I kind of like OAuth in that I don't have to worry about encrypting passwords and saving them to my database and all that other stuff. The other nice thing is that when your users are signed in with OAuth, you can also make many more API requests really easily to whoever it was that authenticated your users. So if I authenticate my users via Twitter, then it's a lot easier for me to make API requests to Twitter if I wanted to get all of their tweets or something. I could still do it even if I didn't use OAuth with Twitter, but it makes it a little bit easier. I'm already doing all this stuff with Twitter, and so it's a little bit less work to add in more things. But yeah, there are trade-offs either way. When I was working for Coinbase, who coincidentally, I happen to be wearing their shirt today. I feel like I say this every class. When I was working for Coinbase, their API OAuth authentication was something that I spent a lot of time banging my head against. And that's because pretty much every major API uses OAuth. So why would all of these different APIs agree to use OAuth, agree to use this one schematic for authentication? What's the advantage of that? Ayo, what do you think? So schema probably wasn't the right word to use. I mean more like this mechanism for authentication. What's the advantage of all of these different APIs using the same mechanism for authentication? Yeah, that's exactly right. It's a lot easier to use multiple different ones. It's super easy. In your passport class, you talked about passport strategies, right? Maybe that sounds familiar. Well, anyway, there are passports ways of making sure a user is actually who they say they are. And Passport's built in such a way that you can sort of swap out these different strategies. You can use basically the same Passport stuff and just sort of plug and play different strategies to authenticate with Facebook or Twitter or Google or whatever. And so instead of having to roll out like a big, huge thing for everything that you want to authenticate with, you can just sort of plug and play these individual little modules, and it's really easy. You don't have to create like a whole new flow for each one. So let's talk about how OAuth actually works. First off, this is some data that we get from the Twitter API. There's actually a lot more data in here. This is just sort of an abbreviated version of it. But the way OAuth actually works is like this. So here's this ginormous diagram. And this is all a whole bunch of stuff that happens really, really quickly. So basically what's going on here, I'm not even going to show that because that's overwhelming. Basically what's going on here is you have a user, they want to log in to your app. So what you do is instead of collecting a username and password from them, you redirect them to Twitter. You all have seen that before, where you click the login with Facebook button, and then sometimes it says redirecting you to Facebook, and then bam, suddenly you're on Facebook. Facebook is going to check in their own database. If you're not already logged into Facebook, they're going to ask you to log in. If you haven't signed up with Facebook, they're going to ask you to sign up. They're just going to ask you to get logged in somehow. And then they're going to create an API token for you. So if you've used API tokens, if you've used APIs before, you've probably used API tokens, where it's some sort of unique ID you send with all your API requests, so that the API people know who's making all these requests. So if you make like 10 million requests in 1 second, then they know who they should cut off. So Facebook, now that you're logged in, they create this token for you. Then they redirect you back to the site you were on before. So if it's for my app, they're going to redirect me back to my app's website on Heroku or wherever. They're going to redirect me back with that API token. Then my app, my server, is going to save that API token as a session variable. And now it can use that API token to query the API from here on out. So I just want to review session tokens really quick, or session variables. The way these things work is very closely linked to cookies. So you have cookies and you have sessions. Cookies are stored in your browser, and sessions are stored on the server. So the way this works is your user has some kind of a cookie that's usually called an SID. And the SID will be, let's say here it's ABC1, 2, 3. Then on the sessions, in the sessions, there's going to be a set of session variables for every single user. So let me add in another user in here. So this is user 1, and this is user 2. Let's say this guy is DEF456. All right, so over here on the sessions, they're going to have a batch of information associated with ABC123. And they're going to have a batch of information associated with DEF456. So when you go to this site, what's going to happen is the site is going to check your cookies to see what your SID is, what your session ID is. This is just a unique ID that the server creates for you. It's going to check to see what session ID you have stored in your cookies. And then it's going to look inside its own memory for all of the variables that match that session ID. So this would be user 1's info, user 1's info. This would be user 2's info. And then they'll just make that data available to that user so that you can render it on the page or do whatever you want to do with it. So it's a way of sort of having a quasi-database. It doesn't actually save this stuff into a database. It just saves it, or a mommy base. It just saves it in temporary memory somewhere on the computer. It saves it in temporary memory because all of these variables, these session variables, get wiped as soon as that user is done looking at that page. As soon as the user logs off that page or closes their computer or quits Chrome or just a certain amount of time passes, their session variable gets wiped and they can't access it again. So that's why it's only stored in temporary memory. You can see this in Chrome, actually. So if I go in here and I go to my content settings, and I know you guys probably talked about this before in like the device class and everything, so this is just a refresher. If I go to GitHub, 4chan, who looks at that? That wasn't me. I can see in here there's this thing called ghsesh. And if I look in there, I get this huge, horrible thing. So this is my session ID. It is not nearly as nice as ABC123. It's huge and it's ugly, but that's because GitHub gets a whole bunch of different users and they all need their own unique ID. And so if you go into your own Chrome right now and look at this, then you'll see your own GitHub session ID. So if I go to GitHub right now, I am logged in, and if I remove this, and I go back to GitHub, I'm still logged in. Well, that's kind of surprising. Let's see. Oh, maybe it's user session. I don't know what the difference between these are. It looks like they have multiple different sessions. Still logged in. Great. Thanks, GitHub. Maybe it's this logged in one. I don't know. Yeah, I'll just delete all of them. One of these is my session variable, and now when I go back to GitHub, still logged in. Throw me a bone here, man. All right. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I'm magic. I don't know. But theoretically, I should be logged out right now. I'll bet if I close this page and I go back to, you know what, I'm going to do this, and it's still not going to work. Nope, still logged in. Damn it, GitHub. Okay, well, fine. That should have worked, but for some reason it didn't. I don't know. GitHub is complicated, but that should have worked. Yeah. So, any questions about what we've gone over so far? All this stuff? Yo, Samir.
So when you like the browser automatically stores the session variables in your temporary memory,
The browser doesn't store the session variables. The only thing the browser stores is the session ID.
and that's the temporary memory.
Both of them are temporary memory. Well, so this actually isn't really temporary memory. It's like semi-temporary memory. Usually cookies will stay in your browser until something comes along and tells them to go away. So I probably have cookies in here. Well, I don't know. I clear my cache on my cookies somewhat frequently, so probably from not that long ago. But if you never go in and you never clear your cookies or you never do anything like that, then you can have cookies from years ago on your computer. Nothing's telling them to go away. But session variables, those expire pretty quickly. And session variables are stored only on the server. That's important because these are way more secure than cookies. They're more secure because people can't access these. They're on the server. So they might be able to access the session ID, but they can't access the session variables themselves. The session ID is just sort of the way of saying like, hey, this is Robin's ID, so look for session variables that match this ID.
So you would get the session variable information when you call the server.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Doesn't do it automatically.
Yep. Yeah, this all happens automatically like pretty much every time you make a request in an Express app. Except in Express, sessions aren't built in automatically. You have to explicitly put them in there. Whereas in Rails, they are built in automatically. So in Rails, you have access to sessions all the time. You don't need to do anything for it. Whereas in Express, you do need to explicitly put them in there. Crystal. Yep, yeah, that's exactly right. So if I go to, I'm not going to do it because I embarrass myself with cookies, but if I were to look at my cookies right now, I probably have a Wells Fargo cookie. If I were to log into Wells Fargo and then check my cookies, I would probably have a cookie that says, this cookie will expire at 3:02 p.m. unless I keep clicking around on the page. Then it'll renew that cookie. But yes, that's exactly right. And sometimes it'll explicitly say, like, your session has timed out. And it's talking about session variables, just like that. Other questions? Cool.
That's like sessions with middleware section. Value.
Yeah. Yeah, it is kind of. I didn't really think about that. It's a little bit more so because sessions are pretty integral to the whole server process. But yeah, I guess it is sort of the middleware. Right. Yeah, so you're right, it is middleware. I just never really thought about that because everyone uses sessions, but I guess they are middleware. So that everyone sort of happens to use. This diagram looks really complicated because OAuth is really complicated. You can do it yourself, you can write your own OAuth thing, but we're going to be using Passport today because it handles all this OAuth stuff for us. Now, I have to say that I always kind of laugh when I go to the Passport repo because the very first thing it says on here is simple, unobtrusive authentication for Node.js. I kind of disagree with the simple part. Passport is not that simple. It is pretty picky and requires a lot of pushing and shoving. And so we're going to be banging our heads against that a little bit today. But it's still a lot more convenient than you having to do all this stuff yourself. Every API is different, and even though they all sort of rely on the same standards of OAuth, there are still differences between them, and Passport accounts for a lot of that stuff, so we don't have to. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to get you guys up and running with an app that uses Twitter for authentication. So what I need you to do is go to this link that I'm going to Slack out. It's apps.twitter.com. How'd you guys put a dog on here? Is that like a pun I'm missing or something?
Yeah.
Dogs. Wow. Captain Observant. Okay, cool. So go ahead and go to apps.twitter.com. If you don't have a Twitter account, you'll need to make one. And so you can just like come up with any random dummy name that you want. I don't really care. because you're probably just going to be using it for this class. But if you do want to develop with Twitter in the future, then you'll need to keep your Twitter name. So I don't know. Maybe it's not a bad idea to come up with an actual Twitter handle. So I'm just going to show the different steps here. It's really simple. Then I'll come around and I'll fix any bugs that may be popping up. So you'll get to this page. You'll need to create new app. And then you'll fill this stuff out. So my passport app. Description doesn't matter. It just has to be at least 10 characters long. I like turtles. And the website also doesn't matter. I'm just going to use Google. However, for the website, it does have to begin with HTTP. You can't just do www. It has to begin with HTTP. The only thing on here that does actually matter is this callback URL. And the callback URL has to be this. The callback URL has to be that. If you type it in, that's fine, but it's really important that you include this :3000 on it. And we'll talk about, so 127.0.0.1, that's actually the same thing as localhost. We'll talk about why we're not using localhost in a minute here. So go ahead and do that. You will know you're done when you get to a page like this, and you see this stuff. And then if you go to keys and access tokens, you should see a consumer key and a consumer secret like this. So I'm just going to take a minute or two to walk around. If you have any trouble with this process or Twitter being weird, then just let me know. Just crazy. Oh, sorry. For website, it doesn't matter what you put into a website. It has to begin with HTTP. I just use HTTP through the web. Twitter may gripe at you if you don't have a cell phone number added to your Twitter account, which is kind of lame, but I guess it's just because they don't want people making, like, I don't know, hackware with Twitter's API. If that happens, you're going to need to go back to regular old Twitter and then go to your profile. Yeah, go to your settings, there we go, and then click on mobile, I think, and then you can set it in there. It kind of slung down my computer again, so I apologize for that. We're going to get to stuff next. And if you feel weird about using your phone number and everything, you can also just use my API key and secret, and that's perfectly fine. Yeah. But you have to type them all out like this. Would anyone rather use my key and secret? You just can't, like, do a whole bunch of crazy crap. Okay. I'd kind of rather you didn't. Yeah, kind of rather you didn't. Oh, I would totally know. Say what? Oh, you can't do it. I never do anything with my Twitter, so I don't really care. All right, anyone having trouble? Throw your hands up in the air like you just don't care, if you are. All right, cool. All right, so now that you've gotten that stuff, now I'm going to ask you to clone down a super simple Twitter app that is called Super Simple Twitter App. So just go ahead and git clone that down. I'm going to do it up here on my desktop. What is that all about? I'm putting it on my desktop, but you can put it in your sandbox or wherever you want. Totally doesn't matter. Oh yeah, it's this thing right here. And then what's the first thing you need to do when you clone down a new Node app? npm install. Yay. All right. So I'm going to get you guys just set up and running with this app, and then if you're having trouble, I'll come around and I'll fix any errors that are happening. So we need a way of getting your Twitter secret and key into this app. But it would be a bad idea to just like hard code it into your app. What's a way we could make these things available in the app while still being secure about it, without like actually uploading the stuff to GitHub? Environment variables. Yep, exactly right. Environment variables. So what I'd like you to do is create a new file called env.js. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you for reminding me. Before you do that, well, actually, it doesn't really matter when you do that. You'll need to get checkout annotate. So there are two branches in this repo. There's master, but I want you to use annotate. Annotate. Oops. Annotated. Thank you. There we go. Yep, get checkout annotated. And just in case you have trouble spelling annotated, I'll send that out. All right, now you can go ahead and create an env.js. So I'm going to do that in Atom. You can do it with touch. And while that's loading, it should contain something like this. So the only thing you should need to change in here is ABC123 is the consumer key and consumer secret. You can also change the session secret to whatever you want. I have fruit bat here, but you can make it literally any old thing. It doesn't matter. All right, env.js. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't actually do it here. There we go. New file, env.js. There we go. That one doesn't actually exist. Here we go.
I got it in the terminal.
Do you have a node modules folder showing up? Yeah, so on some of your Atoms, we ran into this in the first class. I have no idea why, but on some people's installation of Atoms, stuff that is git ignored just doesn't show up over here at all. For me, it shows up, it's just grayed out, but for some people, it doesn't show up at all. I have no idea why. If that happens to you, you can be pretty sure that it's there. Just do atom and then the name of the file you want to edit. So atom env.js. John, did you have a question? Cool, cool. And if you do atom env.js, then it should work just fine. All right, so I'm going to put in my Twitter information in here. So I'm going to copy and paste my consumer key, my consumer secret. If you copied this from Slack, then your callback URL should be good to go, and you shouldn't need to change anything. And I'll change this from fruit bat to breakfast cereal, just because. What's that, Dan? Yeah, you need to go to keys and access tokens up towards the top. You should have a tab up there on Twitter. You got it? Cool. All right. When all that is done, you should be able to start it up. Now, this app does not use Mongo. It has nothing to do with Mongo. So any data that gets created in this app is going to be deleted as soon as the app restarts. But it does still store session variables and anything. But session variables, those get destroyed whenever a server restarts. This is just sort of to show the process of logging in and everything. When all this is done, you should be able to type nodemon, and away it goes. All right, so what this app does, this is actually, like as I mentioned before, a super simple app. And again, I'll come around and I'll fix any problems in just a second, but I just want to get this up. If you go to this address, or if you do anything on this app, you should get a whole bunch of stuff like this in your server log, in your terminal. So what I did was I made a really simple app that has console logs at every step in the process of every request, and it just logs out what's happening at every single step in the process. So everything that you would see in a Passport app that uses Twitter, every single one of those little things that you have to write in has a console log associated with it, talking about what's happening at that particular step. So what I'm going to ask you to do, oh, and this is important. This is my cat right here. She's really cute. I just put that in there just to have a second view and to show off my cat. If you sign in with Twitter, please work, please work, please work, please work, please work. Yes. If you sign in with Twitter successfully, then your username should show up right there. This comes directly from Twitter. It's not saved anywhere. It comes directly from Twitter. And again, you'll see a whole bunch of stuff in here talking about what's happening at each step in the process. So what I'm going to ask you to do is take 10 minutes with the person next to you, and, well, actually, we'll say 13 minutes. Take until 3:20 with the person next to you to walk through all of this stuff. And looking through the server log, see if you can answer these 5 questions on here. So we already sort of answered the last one, but see if you can answer these other 4 questions. And just poke around and see if you can figure out what's happening at each step in the process. Okay? And then we'll come back afterward and I'll call on people to answer the questions. So please take 10 minutes to do that. And I'm going to put on some easy listening music, and then I'll walk around and answer any questions. Say what? Should. If it's not, I'll come figure it out. Oh, so this is important, guys. You can't go to localhost 3000. You have to go to 127.0.0.1.3000. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So you can't use localhost at all when you're using this app. You have to use this address, 127 blah blah blah. That should fix it. Say what?
Yeah, no, it's not, no. I went to localhost 3000 off the bat.
No, I
I started off going to localhost 3000. I clicked that, and I clicked that. So that's probably not probably going to be a lot of next one. But now, I get it, but I started off. Yeah.
All right, is it working for anyone? Wow, half the class and the other half not. That's fantastic. Oh, it's not. Wait, actually, so show of hands, for whom is it not working? Oh, so it's not. Okay. No, now the website, it doesn't matter what, yeah, it doesn't matter what you put into the website, but it's still required. This is required. So, it's in Slack, it's like 127 blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Yeah, that's the one in your app.js. It has to be in there as well. Guys, just to be clear, if you're getting that next is not a function thing, the problem may be in here. So just to clarify, it doesn't, you have to put something in for website, but it doesn't matter what. Callback URL does not have a little red star next to it, but you still have to put something in here. You have to put in this exact string in here. So you need to make sure you have that in your app settings, or else it's not going to work. That's the thing that I selected out earlier. It works. Anyone having trouble with this? So again, please take, you got 5 minutes to try to answer these 4 questions. Is it weird if I just walk around in my socks? These boots are super toasty. Cool. Alright. No, I've actually got pretty good smelling feet. Or pretty not bad smelling feet, I guess. Ariel's really bad smelling feet. I'll tell you. No. What? Well, yeah, they can have an infinite number of session variables, but they can only have one session on your site. Unless if you do like, if you actually, can you ask me that again in like just a couple minutes because that's an important point. Cool. Say what?
I'll try to remember.
Cool. I'll try to remember too. So much fun. Cool. All right, guys. I got 320, so I'm gonna keep on going.